All right, guys. Today's lesson is focusing heavily on sentence structure. So we're going to have a look at the different types of sentences that you can use when you're writing your narrative, and also just when you're writing in general. And we're also going to look at the different ways that you can connect your sentences together and what that actually means for your writing. So there is a quick little warm up. It's a rebus puzzle. We've done them 100 times. So have a crack at those. Just write 1, 2, 3 in your margin and try and work out what you think each one is. I will just give you a little disclaimer. There are all of the answers for all the activities that we're going to do today in our Teams folder. Do yourself a favour and don't have a look until the end, because if you just look at all the answers, you're not actually going to learn anything, and then, this is pretty much just a waste of your time. So your learning intention is that you're revising your understanding of sentence structure so that you can communicate effectively when you're writing your narrative. And there are 3 ways that you can be successful today. So the first one is that you can describe the different elements that are present within a simple, a compound, and a complex sentence. The second one is that you can use conjunctions accurately. And the last one is you understand the difference between an independent and a dependent clause, as well as what a sentence fragment is. So what we're going to start off first is we're going to talk a little bit about clauses. So a clause is a sentence with both a subject and a verb. So I want you to actually pause the video now, and I want you to write that in your Teams notebook. So there are 2 examples that I've got here. The first one is the wolf hid in the forest until nightfall. So the wolf is the subject and hid is the verb. So I've color coded them. The second example is pretty much the same. It says, as the night approached, the wolf retreated into the forest. Wolf still being the subject, and retreated is the verb, which is the doing word, so what the wolf is doing. Now, the point I'm trying to make with these 2 examples is that a subject can appear at the start of a sentence or it can appear at the end of a sentence. It doesn't actually really matter. So the first task that you're going to have to do is there are 8 sentences present on the page right now, all the way from A to H. And what I want you to do for each one is I want you to record what is the subject of the sentence and what is the verb in the sentence. So just pause the video now and get stuck into that. Okay, what we're going to have a look at now is simple sentences. So there are some rules you need to know. Firstly, every single simple sentence should express at least one clear thought about a subject. And also that every simple sentence must have a subject and a verb. So a simple sentence pretty much is an independent clause. If a sentence doesn't have a subject or it doesn't have a verb, like it's only got one or the other, then it's called a fragment, and that's an incomplete sentence. So you may have been typing something up in Word and it had like a little blue squiggly line underneath it, and it will say you've written a sentence fragment. It's because you're either missing one of those 2 things. So what I want you to do for task 2 is there are 5 sentences here, and you need to determine whether or not it is a simple sentence or a sentence fragment. And the way that you're going to do that is you're going to record an S or an F next to each one. So just pause the video now and have a crack at that little quick activity. So we've looked at clauses, we've looked at subjects and verbs, and we've looked at simple sentence, and we've looked at also sentence fragments. Now what we're going to have a look at is independent clauses. Now, independent clauses are a group of words that firstly contain a subject and a verb, and secondly, they make sense on their own. You don't actually need any additional information to understand them. So if you have a look at this example here, it says the students worked hard on their sentence structure. So firstly, subject, yep, the students. Verb, yep, because they're working. Also, does this make sense on its own? It does, because I don't really need to know any other information. You've already told me what they were working on and they were working on it hard, so that's why it's an independent clause. So what I want you to do for task 3 is in your Teams notebook, I want you to write 3 independent clauses of your own, and remember that it must do these things. It must have a subject and a verb, and it must just make sense. Okay, so continuing on our work, we're going to have a look now at a compound sentence. And a compound sentence is when you actually combine 2 independent clauses together and they express more than one idea. Now, there's a couple of catches when you create a compound sentence. So the first one is that you have to connect the 2 independent clauses together using a comma. The second catch is that you have to connect them together using a coordinating conjunction, also known as a fanboy. So a fanboy is for, and, nor, but, or, yet, so. Okay, so if we have a look down at this example that I've provided you, I've said mum and dad brought, so there's a subject and our verb, home pizza. All right, that right there is an independent clause. Okay, I had already eaten dinner. Okay, so I've got a subject and I've got a verb, and that is also an independent clause because that makes sense on its own. Now, to make it a compound sentence, what I've done is I've put in a comma and I've added in this coordinating conjunction right here. So I've combined them together, which is what actually makes it a compound sentence, and it's far more creative than just simple sentences alone. So if we have a look at the next page, what I've done is I've actually explained or given you this diagram here that explains what the different fanboys, their purpose, so what they serve as their function with an example. So for example, if you were using the fanboy for, it's because you're providing a reason for something. You're saying because, like Sam drank some water for he was thirsty, okay? Whereas but also means however. You're like providing a contrasting point. So all the children wanted to eat pizza, but no one wanted to buy it. Okay, so when you are using a fanboy, you need to be very careful which one you select, because obviously the different ones that you select will have like a different effect on your sentence. So this is task number 4, and what you have to do is you have to write 3 compound sentences, okay? And each one you must do the following things. So you must first highlight the subject and the verb, and also the coordinating conjunction. Okay, you also need to label the independent clauses. So what you should have on your page is 3 different compound sentences that look a lot like this. So you see I've written the independent clause and I've labeled it. Independent clause and I've labeled it. I've also got my coordinating conjunction, which is but, and I've also labeled the punctuation as well. So just recapping, you need to write 3 of your own compound sentences. Okay. So we've had a look at an independent clause, which, just to remind you, is a sentence that makes sense on its own. So what we're having a look at now is a dependent clause, okay? And a dependent clause is a group of words that it still has a subject and a verb, but it doesn't make sense on its own. You actually need more information to understand it, okay? So if you have a look at the example here, dependent clause is because he liked the colours. And when you read that, you're like, what? I don't understand. The colours of what? So you need more information to understand it, okay? So let's have a look at the bottom. So this right here is a complex sentence. So it says, Josh purchased the painting. All right, that's an independent clause. That makes sense. I don't need any more information. I know that Josh has purchased the painting. All right. The second part says, because he liked the colours. Okay, and that's where our dependent clause comes in. All right, and it's actually combined together using a subordinate conjunction, which is because. Okay, so it's the independent clause, the dependent clause, combined together using this subordinate conjunction here. So what I want you to do now is I want you to try writing 3 complex sentences, okay? So for each one, just like we did on the last activity, I want you to highlight the subject and the verb, but this time I want you to highlight the subordinate conjunction as well, and I also want you to label your independent and your dependent clause. Now, just to help you with this activity, I've given you a whole bunch of subordinating conjunction examples here. So you've got all of these ones on this section here, and you've got all of these ones down here. So just pause the video now and have a crack at task number 5. This is our last task in today's lesson. And it's a lot. It's putting all of the things we've learned together. Okay, so it's having a look at simple sentences, it's having a look at compound sentences, it's having a look at complex sentences, and you're labeling all the different things. So you're going to be labeling the independent clause, the dependent clause, and then all the different conjunctions. All right. So first thing you're going to do is you're going to have a read of the sentence, okay? And first thing you have to do is identify whether it is a simple sentence, a compound sentence, or a complex sentence. And the way that you're going to do that is you're going to write this sentence in your team's notebook, and then after it, you're just going to use these little codes here, labeling what it is, all right? Now, the next thing that you need to do is you need to label the conjunction, whether or not it's coordinating or subordinate, all right? And it's up to you. You need to label the subject and the verb in both of the clauses, and you also need to label whether it's a dependent or an independent clause. If you have any questions at all throughout this, remember you can just @ me in our teams.